Good evening. My name is Jack Leonard, and I would like to welcome you to the 10th and last in the lecture series associated with our spring semester Master of Landscape Architecture Interdisciplinary Studio 100-Year Coastal Resilience Studio, Hampton, Virginia. I hope that you enjoyed our last guest lecture in this series, Alex Darr, who presented Stream and Riparian Corridor Restoration in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. If you missed Alex's lecture or any of our past lectures, you can watch them on the School of Architecture and Planning YouTube channel. Our guest lecturer this evening is Mary Anne Akers. This evening, her topic will be the community leads, effective engagement strategies. Mary Anne Akers is a social scientist, urban planner, and the dean of the Morgan State University School of Architecture and Planning. Her research focuses on urban sustainability and resilience, community design and engagement, design and human behavior, and community-based economic development. Dr. Akers holds a Ph.D. in urban planning and community organization, a master's in urban and regional planning, and a BA in sociology. Please welcome Dr. Mary Anne Akers.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, and let me go ahead and share my screen. I should know this by now, right? How to do this? Share screen. There you go, share. Okay, can you see? Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then let me do this. Can you see yourselves on my screen? Should I like minimize it? Okay. Okay, well, this is a really good opportunity for me to get to know you all, and to, I would like this to be a discussion at the end, but basically it's, the title is The Community Leads and Effective, and I added authentic engagement strategies. As Jack said, community engagement and participation is one of my, I would say, areas of expertise, in quotes, because nobody's really an expert. Everybody keeps learning. So with that said, it's going to be very graphic, but I came across this particular image because, to me, experience is what really deepens your experience with community. Knowledge is good, and that's where I started. I was a sociologist. Obviously, I read a lot about community, about people, about society, and all that. But that was all knowledge. But the experience is what really gave me or rooted me in authentic community engagement. And mind you, I have been engaged for a long, long time. And what you're gonna hear tonight, this evening, are sort of my evolution as a community engagement person. So when I say long, I looked at my curriculum vitae to look at, okay, how long have I really been doing this? It started, and I'll go through just briefly my life story, because to me, somebody who truly engages with the community should know himself or herself very well before you can totally be open to the community process. So let me go through. Oh my goodness. Oh, I didn't know this was. So I do have a toolbox. I started with a lot of tools in terms of how to get participation, how to study people in a setting, in a physical setting. I looked at my CV, and it's like, wow, I have more than 70 plus experiences, either initiatives, projects that involve community or people. And my toolbox keeps on um, growing and growing. But more than that, the my journey as somebody who engages people in the design process and planning process, I have refined many of these tools. Initially, I was very formulaic in the way that I engage community. When we had charrettes, this is what we do. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as, of course, time went on and I became more involved in the field, then I refined some of those tools. But what you're going to see tonight is more a reflection of the seeds that were planted, the tools that were planted, but with a lot of deeper introspection on what I did wrong and what I did right and what I would do better when I engage the community again. So, my life story. Ever since I was a little kid, I'm the only girl um, in the middle of two boys, my older brother and my younger brother. But my mom and dad always encouraged me to break out. You don't fit the mold. Yeah, I don't. So they embraced my ability or my, I guess, my risk taking, and they said, yeah, just break the mold because you don't fit the mold. So here is me at 19. I was a professor in college, in a college setting. uh, Mind you, this was in the 70s. Okay, I finished college in 3.5 years and immediately I got a teaching job. I was a sociology professor, breaking the mold, right? Many of my students, in fact, were my classmates when I was still in college. So that was a little like, I don't know about this. It was a dance because some of them, kind of took advantage. Oh, we know this professor, therefore, she should give us some, uh, some leeway or flexibility. And so that was me. And this is me ready to embark on my journey to the United States. My parents always said having an American education is something that will make you successful. Not only that, both of them were educated here in the United States, and they said that the way the American system is structured is so open to growth, intellectual growth. Therefore, they wanted to send me. So at 25 years old, I came to the United States to do my PhD program at Michigan State. So again, I broke the mold there. Here is in the 70s when I was a young professor teaching rural sociology. I thought, okay, wait a minute. We are learning about rural sociology, but we're in the classroom. So I made it a point for my students to have an experience in farming villages. And so what I did was I actually paired them with farmers, and they lived with farmers. Obviously, they paid the farmers for their food and all that. So for a whole week, we would just be engaged in the community. This is deep engagement. And later on, when I show you my toolbox, it's one of the more, I would say, um, more participatory. So our students, I told them, you need to live like the farmers. So obviously they slept on the floor, they went to the fields, they they caught rats and mice, talking about your mouse, Colleen, before this lecture, um, because that's what it's important for them to catch the rats in the rice field. Um, and anyway, so we engaged deeply in those farming villages, and thereafter, I would always take them to farming villages. Miners. at, again, breaking the mold. I think I was 20 or 21. I'm not so sure anymore. But I worked at the National Housing Authority, and then I was hired by a mining company to design and plan for a housing community. And so I had to engage with the farmers, and I mean, not farmers, miners, where I had to, go where they actually worked. It was unusual for women to be down there in the mines. Um, but I did go down there. I talked to some of them, many of them, and asked what their housing aspirations were. And from there, then I developed a settlement plan for the mining company. Slum dwellers. When I worked at the National Housing Authority, I also had to engage with slum dwellers. And because we were funded by the USAID to, no, the World Bank to actually um, plan and construct affordable housing for slum dwellers. So I had to engage in the community. I didn't live there, but I was there almost, very regularly. So with that said, that's in the past. That was in the 70s. And again, I said my journey as a academic engaging in community um, has really grown, not only broad but deep as well. So these are some of the principles to consider when you enter a community, or if you engage a group in any design or planning process. First, you've got to center the community, de-emphasize our privilege, and we are privileged as coming from academia. I have this theory that I'm still reflecting on, and I will be publishing this one of these days. Um, let's not behave like the colonizer who extracts information and stories and not produce tangible outcomes. I know, I know how colonizers behave, because the Philippines was colonized by Spain for more than 300 years, and then by the Americans for close to 50 years. So I know what colonization means. And oftentimes we in academia are actually, we behave like the colonizers when we go out in the community. We conduct surveys, or we do stuff with the community, but it's for our own good. It doesn't even move the needle. And so we have to be very careful about how we engage community. If it's only one way, to me, it's not worth it. Go through formal and informal leaders and be sensitive to a true invitation from the community. Um, Normally, an organized group will approach us, for example, at SAP, or when I worked at the University of Georgia, an organized group would come to us and say, we need help in this, we need a plan, we need this. And those are the formal leaders. But to be truly engaged in the community, you need to know the informal leaders there. Um, in many of my experiences, for example, I noticed that the female elderly um, were elderly women were usually the informal leaders. The church women uh, who actually always take a background role are actually the leaders in the church, because they're in control, right? You would always think it's the pastor, but oftentimes it's the women that surround the pastor that do everything. You need to know this. You need to be sensitive to these types of informal leaders. Lastly, and this is extremely important, in all the years that I have been engaged in community, if you don't self reflect, you're going to be stepping in landmines. You have to first know yourself. Be comfortable with your identity. Here is a quote that I came across. The better you know yourself, the better your relationship with the rest of the world. I, I mind you, when I came to the United States, I didn't know what identity was. Okay, um, people will say, "Well, uh, what's your identity?" I say, huh? What? What? Because in the Philippines, we don't. That's not important to us. Individual identity is not important because we're very group centered. And there was a time, I would say maybe about 5 years ago, I attended a conference. It was a community design conference, and there was a session for participants of color. And I was walking to the room inside, and somebody stopped me and said, "Who do I who do you identify as?" And I said, "What? Huh? Who do you identify as?" And I said, "I guess Asian, brown." I was unsure, but that really again sort of rattled me and said, "Wow, yeah, in America, your identity really, really is important." And later on, I do realize unless you know yourself, you're not going to be any good for the community. Here's another anecdote. When I was in Georgia, I joined the faculty in the 80s, and I was already engaged in the community, and um, I was assigned this project to do with community schools. So I went to a rural school, and I stood at the door. It was, if I'm not mistaken, like I think fifth grade, right? And it was a black school or African American school. And so I just stayed there and waited for the teacher to, uh, know that I was there. So a student, and this caught me off guard, a student said, um, "Mrs. Whatever, whatever, a white person is at the door." And so it's like, wow, again, that sort of not rattled, but um, I was taken aback by that. So again, unless you know yourself, you're it's going to be very difficult working in the community. So with that said, I am brown. And for me to be the voice of the Black community is inauthentic and should not be done. Let the Black voices elevate their own voices. Here's some quotes again. "I want to grow," to Pact. "I want to grow. I want to be better. You grow, we all grow. We're made to grow. You either evolve or you disappear." And even up to now, I am still evolving, obviously. All of us are still evolving. The identity of the Filipino today is of a person asking, what is her identity? Yeah, the Filipinos are called Latinos of Asia because we're very Spanish. And so, but then the Americans see us as indigenous. And, so it's, again, that identity is so multifaceted. But if I know myself, then I can be a better community person. Here's another quote. "What colonialism does is cause an identity crisis about one's own culture." And it's very interesting. Another anecdote, I was presenting at a planning history conference several years ago. And after my presentation, oh yeah, I was presenting on Daniel Burnham and how he actually design my city. It's called Baguio City. So anyway, after the talk, I said, I don't know who I am. Am I American? Am I Filipino? Is Filipino American? Is it Spanish? Is it our indigenous? I don't know. And why? And he was even a scholar who I admired so much. Said, "Who cares? Why do you care? It doesn't matter." So it's like, wow. Um, and he was obviously you know, a white male who really did not think that cultural identity was important. Well, now I'm saying yes, it is, or you become ineffective. Here's James Baldwin, another person that I truly admire. His writings are so poignant. He said, a liberal, it is someone who thinks he or she knows more about your experience than you do. And that, again, is something that we need to be careful about when we go to the community. Often we're the louder voice than the community people. Nah, that's not a good, authentic, effective way. So here's another quote that I think all of us, black, white, brown, Latino, uh, um, whatever, we need to always ask ourselves, no matter how open minded, socially conscious, anti racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It is my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimately discrimination. All of us discriminate. It's human behavior, right? But if we are reflective on our biases, that makes us a better academic who goes out there in the community. um, okay, here I'm going to talk about the toolbox that I have developed. um, I wrote a paper that was published in a SILA proceedings in the 90s about the different types or the different tools that classes could use in terms of community engagement or looking at behavior and people in physical locations or places. So I categorize them from sort of low participatory degree all the way to community design build. Mind you, I did this in the 90s, and it has since grown so much. And I have more in the toolbox and more reflection on those strategies. First is tracing. If usually, not usually, but many times we really don't have the time to engage in um, citizen participation or user participation. A good first step is tracing. What does this mean? You go to the place that you're studying, your site, and look at things that would give you um, uh, how this evidence of how people behaved in that site. Case in point, this is an art studio. Okay. Um, with this said, just looking at where tables, for example, um, are positioned indicates that most likely these lockers are not being used, right? Um, let's see what else. There are traces. Oh, here, when you are doing an indoor space, for example, um, and the indoor site is carpeted. Look at you can easily find where people walk, okay, because the wear and tear of the carpet. Outside, you will know where people walk because they will leave a trail. They will make their own trail. So again, tracing is a good way just to study behavior in place. Um, garbage. Garbage is a great, uh, I would say, trace. Um, there was one time where, no. Here's another anecdote. Um, when I was at the University of Georgia, and even here in Baltimore, every Friday night, I would have faculty from around campus come to our house. And normally at the beginning, I didn't know where people were gonna congregate in our house. It's just a small historic house, but I wanted to know. But guess what? Their garbage, where they put their drinks, all that, the ring, the glass ring or whatever on the glass table indicates where people tend to congregate. Um, Another example was when I did a project with public housing in Athens, Georgia, and uh, we particularly involved the youth. These were young, like 10, 11-year-olds. And we wanted to know we followed them and we wanted to know, so what are your safe spaces and what are your unsafe spaces? And sure enough, they took us to their unsafe places. And just by tracing, we knew why. There were needles, there were condoms, so in other words, there was some activity that was going on in that particular spot. So tracing could be sort of one way that you can actually look at behavior in places. Here's another example, but this is more high tech, where you can trace through their cell phones. I've never done this before, but I know colleagues who have done this across the country, where they give cell phones to people, and they just let them go where they need to go, like their daily routine, and they come up with maps like this. So again, immediately, like here, you know that this is a hot spot, meaning people tend to come here. So you look at that and you say, okay, what's really happening there? And you look at, again, the way that people traverse space. Here's another example of observations, this time observations where you can stay in one place. Normally it's best to stay in one place, and I can give you more tips on how to be more effective. And then you just look at behavior, and then you map this behavior, but you map them systematically so that when you combine them or consolidate them into a database or even just maps, you know exactly the variables that um, impede or encourage interaction in a particular space. One tip here, though, is make sure that before you start observing, you need to do a pretest of just looking at what behaviors are already occurring, and then you code them. Visual preference surveys, another way to see people's preferences. I've done this several times. I've done it as a digital tool, also as a printed tool. There are advantages and disadvantages of this. First of all, you have to make sure that the images that you show does not influence their choice of whether they like it or not. If, for example, you had two pictures, right? Two images, one is dark, the other is more bright and sunny, they may choose the bright and sunny because of the way the picture was taken rather than because of the design. So be very cautious about that. Um, Also, there were times where I would show a community group just slides, like PowerPoint slides. Okay, this is image A, image B. But most of those images were things that I took off the web. But the good thing about that is you're right there to ask them, why do you prefer that the shrub be this height? Sorry, I'm not a landscape architect, so I'm going to use common language like shrub. um, so why did you choose this shrub over this tree? Or why did you think that this kind of paver is much better than this paper. Right there, if you're actually doing it, you can get their feedback right away. But if it's a paper thing or it's a digital thing, you don't get that kind of feedback immediately. Telephone interviews, easy, easy peasy. But you also have to be careful about who you interview, right? Because you could be biased in just the sample of people that you interview. Also, nowadays, who answers their phones? If I personally, if somebody calls me on my cell phone and I don't recognize the number, I'm not going to pick up. However, this is very good for older people if you want to interview them by phone. However, again, be fully engaged in the community. You just don't call cold call. You need to make sure that there's already an, an established rapport there. Normally, what I would do in a community is if we are going to call or we are going to like do on-site interviews, we send a flyer, or in their newsletter we tell the community groups, okay, please announce it that on this day we're going to have students going to their homes and interviewing them, and these are the type of questions that they're going to be that they're going to be asked. So in other words, um you know you um you don't go there cold, that there is some type of entry already that has been accepted by maybe the formal leaders. Interactive display. This is another thing that's also quite common. Um, and not as time, um, it doesn't take a lot of time. So you have pictures or you have boards where you, for example, ask them, okay, we are designing this park. What are some of the features that you would like to see in this park? Okay. And then like this woman over here is just writing comments. Sometimes you can have maps to show, for example, which in this site, where are the good spaces that you usually would use for like picnics or whatever, or where are the spots here that you think needs improvement? Where are the spots here that are not that are that need, for example, more grass, or that need tables? If we were to put tables in this park, where do you think we would locate it? That's the type of interactive display. Now, here's the thing though with this. You will have to make sure that you do a really good marketing tool, because I'm telling you, there were instances where we prepared so much for this community event and only about 10 people showed up. Obviously, the data that we got were biased, because it was just, first of all, it was on a Saturday. Um, yeah, it was on a Saturday morning. And oftentimes people run errands on Saturday mornings. And so we did not get the, um, the number of participants that we wanted. Moderate forms of participation, community meeting, digital town hall meeting. Many of you are very familiar with this. This is very formulaic in the design fields, where have a charrette, have this. Mind you, lesson learned, okay? Because I did see some of these formulaic charrettes or community meetings where I said, OMG, you should not do this. But I was a witness of a faculty member who just put all the student work on a board in the community center and ask the community to tell us which ones you like. Put a dot, a yellow dot on the design that you like, and I was looking at student work that was not really final, and it's like, oh my, I don't even understand. The labels were not clear. I did not understand the maps. And it's like, if I don't understand the maps, how would the community person who is not in planning or design understand it? And so, with that said, we have to be very careful. It's not a formulaic thing. Now, I had to go through this and I had to learn my lessons the hard way too. And so, um, that's a good way. If again, you just have an evening to get information from the people, the users of your site. The higher forms of participation, photo mapping. I had this when I was working with President Jimmy Carter's Atlanta project. I was the liaison for the University of Georgia in that project. And we wanted to know where youth in the neighborhood that we were assigned, where they would hang out. So we gave them disposable cameras, and we said, go and tell us where you like to hang out, what you do, and all that. We gave them a week, and they came back. We obviously processed those photos, and then we asked them then to put. We had a big map, and we asked them to paste these um, behavior or events where they occurred, because with just a picture you wouldn't really know where they were. Like there was a picture of a wall and it's like, okay, what does this mean? But with them putting it in a map, then and them explaining to us, okay, we took a picture of this wall because so that's higher form. um this is more digital with the elderly. They love to play with uh, cameras. um, Focus group, same thing. Visual appraisal. Here is a higher form of participation in that you're actually there in the site and giving, uh, like for example, this person here is taking the children on a walking trail and asking them questions about the trail. Here is a person also who right there on the site is asking the residents what are, you know, their assessment of the site. So right there and then in the actual site. I talked about charrettes. Be very creative in how you do your charrettes. Again, I've seen it so formulaic, um, do, done by many design schools, and I think we need to raise the bar here. Participant observation. This is where it's funny, but in the 1970s, without even knowing that I was gonna be involved in community engagement, I just thought the students who are learning rural sociology should be in farming villages. That's the higher form of participation because they are right there and they're staying there. Um, and so participant observation is where you're actually with the people, not centering yourselves, mind you, but staying in the background and just observing. But before you go there, you've got to already have some type of relationship and rapport with them. Um, Discover their lived experiences. If you're working in an urban neighborhood, you want to know how they get to work, for example. So, you know, if if you're really, really very serious about really looking at their lived experience, you may want to know what their route is and actually take the same bus, you know, to their place of work. Intergenerational engagement. I have done kids as young as 6 or 7 years old and let them play and let them come up with their own park, all the way to people who were, in fact, in a not hospice, but more of a senior citizen living space. Symbolism. You have to be very sensitive also to some of the symbolisms that are not obvious, but by observing them, talking with them, living with them, these come out. Relationship to the land and water. That's that's very important. It in one of my projects when I was at the University of Georgia, we actually showed some images of brick paving. And when we asked the community about this, oh my gosh, we did not realize that the brick pavers to them represented slavery. And so, but it was only once they got to know us, felt comfortable with us, and we had a rapport with them, that these came out. Storytelling, very important. When I was with the miners back in the Philippines, and I was the envoy of the company, right? And because these were miners who actually, this was their indigenous land, and the mining company had rights to the mines under their indigenous land, and the company wanted housing to be put in their indigenous land. But anyway, so I was sent there, unheard of. Again, I broke the mold. Women don't usually go to miners and start talking to them, although I already established a rapport because I knew several of them. I worked with them in the mines. But um, I hang out with them. Oh gosh, I had to drink what they were drinking. And they were drinking pure gin. And obviously, if you want them to talk, you have to also drink with them. So they would, you know, um, get a shot and pass it on. It's like after maybe the third, it was like, oh my goodness, I better be careful about this. So they kept drinking and drinking, and I would always pass the shot around. But that was where I I learned more about their live experience through those kinds of experiences. Now I'm not saying for you to go and start drinking with community people, but that was context. Context is important. Participate in local celebrations, in activities, read or listen about the community, especially now with social media, with podcasts, with publications. You can learn more about the community. Hampton, for example, you need to look at their at I'm sure there are in Instagram anything to do with Hampton, or in Facebook, or Twitter, you know, uh, explore and look at all those. And here's very, very important. Um, we need to be very sensitive about emotional discomfort, about trauma, and about oppression experiences. Okay. Here is a quote that I got from this really excellent article, The Emotional Context of Higher Education Community Engagement. I underlined things that I want to read. This was a group of academics who went to New Orleans when Katrina, immediately after it happened. And here, I'll read this. Perhaps more than anything else, we must attend to the reality of emotion and trauma in the communities with whom we attend to engage. When academics step in, they neglected to comprehend the psychological wounds from the trauma of Katrina. And also here, the emotional complexity of individuals gets lost in the background, and that impedes residents' ability to take control of academic partnerships. And that is why when I go out to the community and I have projects, I want to make sure we are engaged with social workers, with activists, with people who understand a community, who understand the trauma that they have been through. That we may not, because we're privileged, we may not even see, externally. So it's very important that we go in as a team of not only designers, but a team of social conscious um, professionals. Okay, that's why to me social work is very important. Um, any questions so far? I'm gonna stop here, and then I'll see if there are questions, and if there are no questions, I'll just talk about other more modern, not modern, other more innovative ways to gain to engage community and gain more information and knowledge about people in settings.
Thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. I'm sure we have questions. Everybody, as always, you can either type those in the chat or you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
I guess I'll start with a quick question. Do you see much difference in the way to engage a urban community versus a rural community?
Yes. Yes. Here's one of the anecdote again. Not anecdote, I guess experience, because I engaged about 30 communities in rural Georgia. And with that, we had to make sure that the formal leaders were first informed, or that entry is through the formal leaders, because in many rural communities, status quo is very important. And when you disrupt that status quo, you already lose the people. In Georgia, for example, when we would go and engage 30 different communities, many of the people who attended actually were majority white. But we know, because we did the homework, we did statistics on the percentage of Black residents versus white, and there was a significant number of African Americans in their community, but they were never taken to the table. So we had to be honest with the leaders and said, look, we're here helping you come up with a design for, let's say, the town center. But we don't see the other residents who also use the town center. But we had to be very careful about that, because again, those leaders who paid us, they want to keep the status quo. And it's harder to penetrate rural communities than urban communities. Oh, here's another thing about rural communities. One thing that I have always committed to is we will help communities not only give them a plan or give them a design and then leave. We have to be able to connect them to resources so that the plan can be actually implemented. And in rural communities, you don't have the type of resources that urban communities have. In urban communities, you have the CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, that communities can use to, for planning or for design. In rural communities, it is so hard to connect them to resources that will really move the needle.
Thank you.
Maura?
Yeah, I have been thinking about how to frame this question.
Just ask it.
Yeah.
This is a safe place.
Well, so I think I asked the same question of Kelsey Brooks when she came to speak to us for Maryland Sea Grant, which is, how do you deal with it when it would appear that different like factions or parts or forces within the community are in conflict with each other about what they want to see happen? I feel like, I mean, you know, we've been looking at Hampton this semester, and I mean, you know, we've been studying it for a semester, but I would not deign to be an expert on any aspect of Hampton. It's an incredibly complex city. I've never seen it. I've never been there. I've talked to like, you know, 3 neighborhood representatives at like the, you know, the small meeting that we had as part of the design competition. But it would seem from the outside that there is a fair bit of conflict between what people see and want for their future there in terms of like, you know, I think there's a development interest that wants to just keep building, you know, as long as possible and as far as possible. You know, there's residents' interests who don't want to see their neighborhoods change dramatically and, you know, feel a degree of comfort with living near the water and on the water. And I think there's also, I mean, I don't know if this is just my perception from the design competition. I think there's also an environmental interest there that sees it as like, you know, like parts of this city are kind of screwed, for lack of a better word. And I don't know that the residents there necessarily see it that way. And it's been really challenging to try to think about in our design proposals, how to reconcile all of that, especially as like, you know, we're like little baby landscape architects. Like, I'm not an expert. I certainly don't have like an answer, you know, for what the right thing to do in someone else's home is. So yeah, that's not really a clear question, but that's what's on my mind.
No, but that's a very valid point that you brought there. But I'd like to put something in context. You do know about Hampton. What you presented, because you did the research, that maybe people there have not done the research. So you have presented things that they may not even know. So you have contributed. Don't diminish your value here. Because we are in an academic setting, we have the tools on how to do research. Now, in cases like that, it's not going to happen overnight. What I'm telling you this, I had a community project where I had the KKK, okay, 2 KKK members. We were about maybe about 15 to 20, and in a meeting we had 3 KKK members there, and then we had maybe you know, a few veterans, and then we had African Americans, and then we had some Latinos. Can you imagine how volatile that community meeting was? Although we were there for a day, and so we had to tread lightly. We knew the KKK were showing up, so we had to make sure that our questions were framed well, so that it doesn't trigger a fight. But what we did was we engaged them in not very serious conversation. In fact, we engaged them more in games, where then they realized a lot of drawing, right? And we were prepared because we knew who would show up. Drawing, visioning, more than actual things that they wanted to do for the town center. And so we tried to limit conversations that revolved around political affiliation or anything politics. And mind you, after I felt that it was getting a little hot, I had to go up there and I had to do some aerobics with, you know, just for them to stand up. What is, I heard it through the grapevine. That song I had to ask my colleague, find that, find that. And so I had to lead. Everybody was dancing and all that. It kind of, how do I say this? It lowered the anxiety, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't there. So there are tools to do that. But in your case, like in Hampton, yeah, there's going to be fight. But your plans, your designs are just the beginning, are just the beginning. It's not going to be resolved this semester or even with that competition. There has got to be more communication. And just let everybody listen. I remember when we were with Jimmy Carter, um, one of our, I would say, ground rules is nobody should dominate. And if we feel that somebody is dominating the conversation, we say, okay, get a piece of paper, put your finger here, crumple it up, and that person who dominates start throwing wads of paper. And we did that to Jimmy Carter. What I'm saying is the developers may be the dominant group here, right? But in a way, make it levity, have levity. But again, as I said, it's not going to happen with one project. But let them talk. Just let them talk. Let the developers talk. Let the residents talk. Just listen. Give them a time, 5 minutes. And then people will start saying, I never thought about that. And it has happened many times. Now, I mind you, there were several times we were a failure. We wanted to leave that place like immediately. There was a time that I think we were even asked to leave or something. But it's not all successful. But just have all the different stakeholders just listen to each other is a step.
Thank you. That's very helpful reminder. I appreciate it.
Any other questions?
Marianne, how do you address, and we've got a little bit of this in Hampton, how do you address making the community understand or be aware of an issue that either they don't want to be aware of or are just not aware of, and their focus is on something totally different? Here, to some extent, we're finding that people don't even perceive necessarily flooding and sea level rise to be an issue. Other communities may have other issues that through our assessment, we see as something that needs to be addressed, but the community itself has not shown that as a priority. How do you gingerly or strategically engage those issues?
So my first question to those people is, have you encountered flooding in your home? Maybe they haven't, or maybe they have. And then storytelling. So what was it like? What was it? And again, this may be very idealistic, but I need to be there to actually know how to address this. But the thing is, sometimes, and I noticed this in disaster-prone areas, people are moved just during the disaster and immediately after disaster, and then they forget. They forget what it was like. So having them relive those memories, hopefully will stir something up. That's one of those things that I would suggest, and get to know more. Why are they saying that it's not a problem? And then show them the maps, show them pictures. Does this look familiar? Are you aware that this area was flooded? Maybe they're not aware. No, I'm sure they are aware, but somehow it has been put back in their minds, and so they're not dealing with that. so it's very important that in disasters, some have um, selective memory because of trauma, that they think it's not a problem. Oh, that's one thing that we in academia is, we're very privileged because we can show them maps that maybe they have not seen. Okay. And I remember when we went to those rural communities in Georgia, um, we did all our demographics, we did statistics, we put them in a booklet. And when we showed them, we said, it seems like 40% of your residents are like below or are in poverty. And immediately they deny that. No, that's not right. Where did you get that? Da, 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 da. Well, it's the census. Well, the census is wrong. We don't trust the census, all that. But the fact is, when you show them the data, when you show maps, it sometimes, most of the time, it will open their minds. But you need to dig deeper. Why are they saying that it's not a problem? Why? There's something deeper than just denial. Or maybe, yeah, there is denial, but there's something deeper behind that denial. And that's where your psychologists and your social workers will come in, the social scientists who know people, who can, deal more with people than designers and planners, need to be part of the team.
Yeah, I think that gets to the whole idea of kind of transdisciplinary
Yes.
approaches to solving these problems, that
Yes.
everybody tends to look at it from the perspective of their background and their training.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these issues are much more complex than just what we're seeing in a map.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. But it does take time. That's why whenever now I have community projects, I don't do things for free anymore. Something's got to be paid, because communities also have to understand. Now, unless it's they're really in dire need, but communities also have to have skin in the game. Should also, they feel better if they actually put something in the project. What about the others? Other students?
That's what I say. What about the others?
I volunteered at the design studio, and we did a lot of the neighborhood design studio, and for 2 projects, and we did a lot of the things that you brought up, except for the phones. I haven't seen them.
Yeah, the phones. Yeah. You mean when people went out to take pictures of significant and insignificant places and spots?
You traced people with the phones.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
But I found one of them, we offered food, and that was a big help. We had Popeye's chicken.
Yes. Yeah. Especially when you have community meetings at 6:00, you have got to have food. I mean, who's gonna go to 6:00 meeting and they'll be hungry, and people who are hungry may not be the most creative people. So yeah, you have to have food. That's very important. Yep. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, it's actually a little past 6 p.m., so we took up a whole hour and then some. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank everybody who's participated for the past 10 weeks. I think it's been a good lecture series. I think Dr. Akers, yours was a good way to cap it off thinking about community and community engagement was a good way to kind of bring this to a close. I assume you will be available if students have any
Of course.
future questions to ask as this
Yes.
process goes on.
Yep.
The students will be presenting their final work on the 17th of May. So we discussed all that today, and also trying to put everything together for the conference in November. So we've got still a long way to go as far as the finale of all this. I would like to personally thank Colleen for all the help she's been during this this semester. It's made it much easier than it would have been without her assistance.
Yes.